Good evening. Oh, man, pretty loud. Today is our city council regular meeting. Today is December 13th. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. At this time, it's 6 o'clock. We'll go ahead and stand for the invocation and the pledge. Mark, would you lead us in an invocation, please?
Let's pray. Father, we thank you for today, and we thank you for opportunity to gather as a community. We thank you for those in the audience that have come for this meeting, and we thank you for many of those in the audience that have given so much time to our community. We thank you for those on the board that are serving, and we pray that you will be with them as they make decisions for our community, and that you continue to bless our community. This time as we think of you and this time of Christmas and holidays, we pray that we'll be a loving and caring community. Continue to bless us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, at this moment, we'll have a public hearing at 6:01. This public hearing is on the annexation of a BN 17.238 acres of land, more or less, out of, is it Pariton, Share 15, and also a portion out of NT Givensney track, out of Share 12, Espiritu Santo Grant, Cameron County, Texas, located on the west side of the city limits on the north side of Highway 100. Mark?
Mr. Mayor, for the audience, and then they can speak, where the location is on FM 803, about a mile north, between Whipple Road and Henderson Road on the west side. Some of you might know it as the old Morrow residence. There's acres there that want to bring into the city. So that's the location.
Again, at this time, the public hearing is open, so anybody wishes to have any comments in regards to this public hearing, you may do so at this time. If not, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing. So with that said, doesn't look like anybody's coming up, so we'll go ahead and close the public hearing at 6:02. And we'll go ahead and move on to our visitors' remarks. At this time, I have one visitor remark, and this is Mr. Manuel Abrigo. If he would like to come up to the podium, he would like to share some information with us. And again, thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners. It's been a while, and it's good to see some old faces here and friends. I'm here to talk about the fire department. You know, Port Isabel has the lighthouse. Well, we have something just as been here so many years when the city was adopted in the mid-40s, and you'll hear it every day, and we just take for granted, but it's a siren. And that siren was put in for a purpose, and that's to call firemen when there was a fire. Back then in the 40s, landlines were very limited. There was no way of calling. Pagers were uncalled for, and matter of fact, I think Mr. Holland used to. There was a grocery store next to the fire department, and literally he would sound that siren. In fact, one time I was there, and he closed the grocery store because he went running to answer the call. And we've come a long ways, you know. And it's amazing, and I've talked to not only to local people, but I've talked to county people, and Los Fresnos is in the map because of our fire department. Our fire department is 100% a volunteer fire department. They've been around, and not only do they do a heck of a job, certified, like paid people, but they have the equipment. They got more equipment than any other fire station in the county. and then to be volunteered. And when they have a response that they're rated on certain, and when is the response time? And that's 2 minutes. Keep in mind that the volunteer fire department, they're home, they're asleep, like us. Sometimes we look out the window, is there frost out there? Is it cold? Well, these men and women, they jump out of, they answer the call, and they do a heck of a job, you know. And I'm here to just say a big thank you. And when you see these people at Julia's, at Whataburger, there's nothing wrong to buy them a meal. You know. These guys are volunteers. They do a heck of a job. And, you know, a few years ago, we started with a donation in your water bill, $1. And that would go toward, and it's a wash, and we still have it. I understand there's like 900 a month. But I challenge, if you live in the city, to join in and pay City Hall. And if you don't want to join, you can definitely go see Mr. Gene Daniels, our fire chief, and donate $50, $100, whatever you like, because it's volunteer. It's to help them run the fire department. And you say, well, it takes about $600,000 to run the fire department. It takes a little over $1 million to run the EMS. But keep in mind, we don't have any payroll in the fire department. But these individuals, they just are awesome. They're there all the time. There's 35 active on the roads, and there's another handful waiting to go in. But they don't take them in because it takes money for each fireman to get dressed. Costs about $5,000 per unit, per person. So it takes a lot. You know, I was talking to the chief, and he's telling me, well, yeah, you know, we had 21 calls this weekend. Well, gasoline might be lowered for us, but you know what? Those big engines, they get lousy mileage, 5 miles, 4 miles a gallon. So if you can donate, or if you know somebody that can help out, and if anything, give them a big thank you for everything they do. You know, they're head and shoulders about, not only with volunteers, but I'll put them up against City of Brownsville, Harlingen, San Benito, and South Texas for that matter. They're called to Falfurrias. This summer they were called to the King Ranch to fight brush fire because they have the brush truck. Other people don't even have brush trucks. San Benito has a couple of them and they're broken. You know, so I'm here to tell you that it's awesome what we have, and we need to continue to support them. And basically that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rodrigo. On the consent agenda items, we're going to go ahead and be taking a look at the first 5. Please disregard number 6. We are not to take action on number 6. We're going to set that aside. So in regards to the first 5, is there any of those 5 that any of the group would like to remove and set aside? If not, if there's a motion to be made, council?
I second the motion.
Okay, motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye and raising your hand. Aye. And all those who oppose do the same. Motion carries. In regards to action items, we're going to go with number 1 first, which says consideration and action to approve the first reading of Ordinance 544 to annex territory of the city of Los Fresnos and extending to the boundary limits of said city. And this is in regards to the public hearing. Any questions or comments from the board? If there's no questions or comments at this time, if there's a motion to be made?
I'll make a motion to approve the first action, the ordinance 544 to annex territory to Los Fresnos.
Thank you. Motion has been made
I'll second.
and motion has been seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye and raising your hand.
Aye.
And all those who oppose do the same. Motion carries. Moving on to the next action item. This is a good one. This is a consideration and action to establish criteria for a Citizen of the Year program and choose an individual for 2022. Now, I know we have that individual here today, and so I'm excited for today's decision. It's something that we've been waiting a long time for, and I think it's much deserved. Any questions or comments about this? And I'm, Mark, would you like to say anything in regards to this, or Okay, so this is something that we would like to I would like to nominate Mr. Sheldon for, the years of service in the community, all the stuff he's done with the fire department, and I know he's not working here anymore, but he's much appreciated and is still in all our thoughts. And that's the motion.
Mayor, I second that motion.
Thank you very much. Motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
And all those who oppose do the same. Now, this is, I'm going to go ahead and because we're doing this, I wanted to see if, we were going to take a small break in a bit, but I wanted to maybe see if Mr. Sheldon would like to just kind of come up and just say a couple of words for a couple of minutes here real quick. If there's anything you'd like to share, we'd love to come up and hear from you. And yeah, come on up. Now, don't forget that next, I think January 10th, we are having a more formal event where we will have a lot of goodies in store for you as a Citizen of the Year. So this is just for you to kind of accept this.
Well, I'd like to thank the mayor and the council members for this honor. It is a great honor. I'm humbled to accept it. It is really appreciated, and it's been a while since I've been a firefighter. I became a firefighter 50 years ago when I joined the Navy back in 1971. And I joined the Navy. I was going into the Air Force, and my brother-in-law says, "Don't go in the Air Force." So I said, "Okay, I'll go in the Navy." And my recruiter says, "I can't promise you anything. You're going to go in, and they're going to give you what they want." I said, "Okay, I'll do that." Back in 1971, and when I got to my first base, there were 16 of us guys on the bus, and we all lined up, and it says, "We need 2 firefighters." And there was myself and a friend of mine, and they said, "You and you go that way," and we did. We didn't know we were going to be firefighters till we got to the warehouse, and they says, "Okay, you're firefighters now." And since that day on, I loved it. It's a beautiful job. And I did 4 years with the Navy. I did 6 years with Union Carbide. I did 30 years in Brownsville, and I've been with Los Fresnos for 40-some years. And you gotta love it. I had 3 sons, and I told them, take the firefighter's test. Firefighter's test in Brownsville it's a hard test. They said, no, no, and they took it, and my 2 oldest sons came out 1 and 2 on the test. And one of them right now is a fire chief in Brownsville, and the other one's just a firefighter, but he's studying to be a fire inspector. And you ask him, do you like being a firefighter? And they say, yes, it's a beautiful job, beautiful career, and it's got everything you need for a career. So I need to tell the guys in Brownsville, we've got a lot of new guys in Los Fresnos, that being a firefighter, you gotta have pride, you gotta have courage, and then you gotta have a love of the job. You gotta love being a firefighter, because if you don't like being a firefighter, it's not gonna work for you. And we do have a lot of new guys in Los Fresnos, and I'm gonna have to step down now, because it's time, 40-some years, and pass the hose to somebody else. But I really appreciate the honor you guys are bestowing on me, and thank you very much.
Mr. Sheldon, it's not only about you. I mean, there's a woman to this as well. So your wife was right there with you, working for the school district for 28 years and being a part side by side with you. You know, not everybody can take time from their life to give back to the community, and for what you and your family have done is just a great example of what the American person should strive to be. And as I speak for myself and for the council, I think that we're very honored and humbled that you chose Los Fresnos to be the city where you reside and you work at. So again, thank you. I know next on the 10th, we're going to have a lot more to say, and Mark has some words that he'd like to share as well. Thank you very much.
I know there'll be a proclamation and some goodies for him next month, but if someone can't make it next month, I wanted you to hear it this time too. All three of his kids also volunteered here, so they didn't just go into the fire service in Brownsville. They all volunteered here, and I was part of that back in those days. I want to tell you a story. I don't remember, it was 86 or 87. I joined the fire department in 86. We got early on, we got a call to help Port Isabel in a huge warehouse fire on, I don't know, what is it called? On this side where more of the industrial part is of Port Isabel. We got there, and the building was pretty well glowing. Sheldon says, "Mark, come on, you're with me. I'm going to teach you something." And I don't remember who was behind me, but
Robert Cepeda.
Robert Cepeda, okay. It was Geronimo, me, and then Robert Cepeda. And we went in, and we had, of course, our air packs on and all the gear. Sheldon had the hose, and I was behind him, and you're supposed to, be up close to be support, and Robert the same behind me. And it seemed like we went in for a mile. Of course, it wasn't, because the hose wasn't that long, but as we got in there, and he's spraying everywhere, and I don't know how long we were in there, it seemed like forever, but I looked around, and I could see fire in all sides, because as we went in, it kind of burned like this around us. And I said, "Sheldon, there's fire everywhere." And he goes, "Yeah, ain't it great?" Anyway, I learned a lot that day from him. We came out, and we were okay, and the fire was put out eventually, but a lot of good memories, and I wanted to share that one because that's the way he did with not just me, but countless numbers of volunteers that were new and learned to trade from him. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I'd like to mention one more thing. I forgot to mention my wife. A volunteer firefighter can't do it on his own, because I'd be barbecuing and I'd yell out at my wife, "Don't burn the meat." And she never did. Or we'd be getting ready to go out someplace, and I'd say, "I'd be right back in 5 minutes," and I'd be gone for 2 hours. And for 40 years, she did that to me. She stuck with me, so I'd like to thank her. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Daniels had something he wanted to share, and come on up.
I was going to share that story that Mark shared, but, when you look at our fire department right now, I just out of curiosity, I looked today with the members we have right now, we have 347 years of experience in the fire department. And when you look at the members that have been there for a long time, Geronimo is the one that trained them. Starting from back when Mark was there. I've been there 30 years. I learned from Geronimo. Wally's been there 27, 28 years. He learned from Geronimo. And you look at the members we have now that have been there for a long time, Geronimo is the one that trained them, and they're the ones that are still there. So the department wouldn't be where it is today without people like Geronimo. And he did all the fire prevention stuff for as long as I can remember. He did fire prevention. Nobody else wants to do it. He did it. So he did turn in his resignation to me tonight. that doesn't mean we're gonna accept it. You know, he may not physically wanna go do fires, but he's got a lot up here, and we're proud of that, so we're gonna tap into that, and don't know what I'll do with this resignation, but thank you.
Thank you, Gene.
Mr. Abrigo, would you like to say, yeah, go ahead, a couple of minutes, you can say something. I do want to open it after to the board and make sure that they also say a couple of words if they'd like to as well, after Mr. Abrigo.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, let me tell you something that you don't know yet, and they're not in your notes. But Geronimo graduated at the age of 18 from Brownsville High School. There was only one high school. There wasn't, it was 1970. He was 18 years old and he joined the Navy. But the other thing that I was going to tell you is that Geronimo went through dialysis about 19 years ago. And he never dropped. He was still showing work. After dialysis, we'll go to work at the fire station in Brownsville, or before doing dialysis. His brother gave him a kidney, and thank God he's here. And he still volunteered. So, you know, we say, you know, we have heroes. Well, he's our hero. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Council, would you like to say a couple of words?
Geronimo, I don't know you personally, but, you know, I've retired with 35 years as a police officer, and let me tell you, the firemen, they're partners of ours, and I know they call us the Blue Canaries, but, you know, whenever we needed something, we'd call the fire department, and they get there in a heartbeat, and I don't know how you all do it, and how you did it for so many years. And I just want to commend you for all the years of service that you provided to this community. And like the chief said, don't let him go, because he's got too much knowledge. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Shelton, I'm very proud to have brought this up. I could not just let it go because we have people in Los Fresnos that really do their time and they serve this community for the longest time, and we kind of forget about it. And I said, you know, me and Abrigo were talking about it and said, we can't let this go. This is a man that has served this community for the long time and for, you know, for this community. So I said, I'm gonna put it on the agenda to recognize this man because he cannot be without being recognized. And I'm very proud to have done and put it on the agenda. Ms. Shelton, congratulations, Shelton.
Mr. Sheldon, thank you so much for all your service. Thank you to your beautiful family for everything that you guys do for our community and for everybody, because it's not just Los Fresnos, it's an entire community, an entire cities. I'm so grateful that you're part of Los Fresnos. I'm so grateful to be part of Los Fresnos and to be around people like you and your family. We hope that you stay with us, and we know that you're gonna retire, but I'm pretty sure that you'll be around with Chief Daniels and he's not gonna let you go. And definitely in January, we'll make something that you really deserve, a very nice ceremony for you and your family and all your loved ones. So be expecting that.
Thank you, Mr. Sheldon, for being part of this community and everything you do, being a public servant, whether police or fire, you guys take on a responsibility that not many get to feel what that pressure is like. Over the many years that you've been involved with our Los Fresnos Fire Department and around our area, it's truly an honor to have somebody with that capacity to be able to run these programs and build them like you have for us. A lot of people are like you. They don't like to talk about themselves and everything they've done, right? But honestly, it's best to leave it for those that you have impacted, because honestly, all these people around you have many things to say about you, great things. So I appreciate it, and thank you very much.
Well, Mr. Sheldon, I too went to service in 1971.
And during the shipboard fire drills, I decided I never wanted to be a fireman. But I congratulate you on your career.
So at this time, it's 6:25. We'll go ahead and take a 10-minute recess, and then we'll go into closed session right after that. So at this time, I'll go ahead and take the break, unless, Mark, you want me to?
Go ahead and read the closed session.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and read the closed session. Okay, so following the break, the closed session will be deliberation pursuant to Section 551074, Title 5 of the Texas Government Code, the Texas Open Meetings Act, regarding the following appointment and duties of alternate or acting judge for municipal court. So at this time, we'll take a break. At 6:25, we'll be back at the 6:35 closed session. Thank you. 7:31, we'll go ahead and call the meeting back. We still have a quorum. Oh. Okay, I'll give it a couple of minutes. Alrighty, the time is 7:32. We'll go ahead and open the meeting back up. Open session, deliberation of possible action on the following appointment duties of the alternate or acting judge for municipal court. So I'll go ahead and read the action item. Consideration and action to appoint an alternate or acting judge for municipal court. Is there a motion to be made? I'll go ahead and make the motion that we take no action.
I'll second.
Okay, motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
Aye. And all those who oppose do the same.
I oppose to.
You opposes? Okay. One opposed.
Sorry, object.
Yeah, objection. One objection and 5 yes. 5 yeas. Two. Mr. Macias, what was your vote? He said aye. Okay, moving on to presentation and discussion of the tax increment financing in Texas, including information on general impact analysis for the proposed development known as The Woods at Los Fresnos, Highway 100, and Whipple Road. Hello, sir. Good evening. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. My name is Bill Calderon. I am a Houston-based economic development consultant. I've been in the business now of doing economic development probably for a little over 3 decades, and in private practice now for about 22 years. I am here representing Mr. Rufino Garza, and he has a parcel of land located just off of Highway 100 and 803. A section of it is in, the largest section of it is in the city of Los Fresnos, and a smaller piece is in Indian Lake. And he's contemplating the development of this parcel of land into a mixed-use residential and commercial development. And we're here to ask for the city of Los Fresnos' help in the proposed creation of a tax increment reinvestment zone to help finance basically repayment to the developer for a little over $23 million worth of capital improvements to render the land able to be developed. It's all raw at this point. The amount that would be attributable to the city of Los Fresnos is just a little over 19 million. The rest is in Indian Lake. And I visited with your city manager, I want to say just a little over, or a little under a month ago, and he suggested that it might be a good idea to come and just present the concept to you guys and make myself available to answer any questions that you might have. I have done a lot of this in the valley. Most recently, just down the road in Madeira, where working with the city of Brownsville, we created a reinvestment zone for that development project, and it is now underway in construction of the first 2 phases. I also created a public improvement district for that area to finance certain maintenance costs associated with pieces of that development project. And other parts of the valley, I've done reinvestment zones in the city of Mission, in the Sherryland area, where we financed capital improvements associated with that initial residential area. We did the road to the new International Bridge. We did a fire station and emergency operations center for the city, and a number of other municipal facilities as part of that reinvestment zone. I've also done, I did the first reinvestment zone in Brownsville back in 2005 for a mixed-use residential project as well. And I've done one in Penitas and one in Edinburgh as well. These tools are very, very facile, very flexible tools. They have become a favorite for governmental entities because of their flexibility, but their effectiveness as well. And tax-based expansion being as important as it is so that you can grow your revenue streams, this is one of the best tools that you could possibly use. So to that end, let me go ahead and start. Next slide, please. Reinvestment zones basically are set up to finance public infrastructure. There is a but-for that is contained in the statute that basically provides that, you know, it should be used in situations where if you don't use it, the likelihood of a project happening is not great, and or if the project were to happen, that it grows much more slowly because of the lack of local incentives. It basically will finance public improvements and or replace infrastructure in places where a development has already occurred. It can be initiated by a city or a county. Property in a city's ETJ these days can also be included in a TERS if the city wants to have another jurisdiction participate in an area that is not yet within the bounds of a city. And the thing that makes it very appealing to governmental entities is when they're created, it creates an opportunity for other jurisdictions to partner with you, so that to the extent that the zone is established, it's not just one jurisdiction stream of revenue, it can be multiple streams. So the cost of projects can be repaid much more quickly because you're able to partner essentially with your county, with municipal utility districts, ESDs, anybody basically who might levy a tax within the boundary as set. Next slide, please. The criteria basically, and this is right out of Chapter 311 of the Texas Tax Code, is that one of these conditions must be met in order for you to meet the findings test in the ordinance that would create the reinvestment zone. It's either predominantly open with physical constraints for development, has defective infrastructure issues, faulty lot layout, or there is a potential to stimulate new development. Next slide, please. This slide is one that is kind of a standard tax increment financing photo to try to capture the how it works. If you focus on the bottom left-hand corner and see the arrow that goes up labeled tax, when you get to the first line and then take that line all the way across to the right, that section of green labeled revenue retained by the jurisdictions actually represents what's called base value. If you imagine a reinvestment zone just being a square, and you take a snapshot of of the value inside that square, let's just call it $5 million. That is base value, and the taxes that each jurisdiction levies on that $5 million go into their respective funds the day before you create it and the day after you create it, and those taxes continue to go into your general fund for the duration of the zone. You'll note, as the line curves up and it gets into that orange area, that section of the graph basically represents the growth in value as a result of vertical development that happens inside the zone. So you go from 5 million to 6 to 10 to 15 to 30 to 50, et cetera, and it's the taxes on that increment, that growth, that are used to pay for what are known as project costs inside the reinvestment zone. Where it says termination, that basically represents that all the project costs have been paid, and yet the tax base continues to grow by virtue of market growth and or continued collateral development in the area. And all of the taxes after termination basically come back into the city's general fund. And so for a period of time, you give up some of your future taxes to pay for project costs, but once those project costs are paid, everything comes back to you. And so it's a way to stimulate your tax base expansion. Next slide, please. Basically, the revenues derived by the increment created set forth a means by which you can do public-private financing so that the city can partner with private entities to make development happen, to catalyze development where it's challenged, and or to attract capital. I oftentimes talk, when I teach this class to economic developers, I talk about this tool being like a magnet. Because once you create it, what it does, because it has the capacity to help people get some of their money back for their infrastructure costs, it draws private capital into your jurisdiction that might not otherwise come. Developers, when I started doing this in the city of Houston, one of the things that I did not anticipate but discovered is that I didn't always have to have a project that I would use this tool for. I did it that way as a project-based tool, but after 5 or 6 of them, I realized that I could put one somewhere where I wanted development to happen. And because people that were used to using it and making a little bit more money because they would get their money back for infrastructure in terms of reimbursements, they would go to the next place where there was a zone because they could make a little bit more money. And so it actually magnetized that capital investment. And I tell jurisdictions that not only does it work that way very well, but it also enables you to tap the other jurisdictional monies, in this case, the county. And so they're very, very good tools. They also are debt facility mechanisms. And so as the revenue starts to come into the increment pot, bonds can be sold or notes can be taken out and repay the source of the capital, whether it's a private developer or an institution. And then that money basically, typically, if it's a developer, would usually be reinvested to continue that development project. And so often when you do a bonded indebtedness using increment revenues, it's not atypical to see that happen multiple times so that revenue keeps coming back into the reinvestment zone, and it basically accelerates the development within the zone. The project plan and finance plan referenced in this slide basically describes the governing document that sets forth what a zone can do. When you create one, basically you go through 2 steps, a preliminary plan and then a final plan. There's 2 parts. One is what's going on in that area to begin with, and it's kind of a description of the existing status of the dirt. Or of the area to be redeveloped, and then the finance plan, which sets forth the budget, the things that reinvestment zone will pay for, and that the finance section also projects how much revenue will come into the zone based on an assumed rate of participation by the creating entity and the other entities that would participate. So you have to go through this exercise to determine whether it will work or not. But it's also part of the document that governs how the tool is used. Plans can be amended, boundaries can be amended, so when you create one of these, you're not necessarily locked into concrete in terms of where you start. You can add territory. It doesn't have to be contiguous either. You can have multiple parcels of land that are disconnected, but all part of a reinvestment zone. These days, you can also use 380 powers. If you imbue 380 in the plan for a reinvestment zone, you can use the tax incremental revenues to grant finance or to loan revenues to further capitalize development within the zone. Next slide, please. This list, I won't read it, but I'll leave it to you to read. This is right out of Chapter 311. These are the kinds of things that a reinvestment zone can pay for. The top half basically are meat and potatoes infrastructure kinds of costs. The bottom half are the professional fees associated with what it takes not only to create one, but to also run one. Next slide, please. The reinvestment zones are governed by a board of directors. The statute limits zones to a maximum of 15 people. When I've created them, I typically recommend to jurisdictions that they limit the board sizes to 5 to say 7. And that's assuming that you have a county participating, and the county is one of those people. So that you, with a board of 4, you have a quorum and you can conduct business without slowing yourself down. I don't know if you all have quorum issues with your body, but typically special purpose districts, because it is a volunteer position, sometimes it's challenging. And if you have large boards, it makes it that much harder to be able to conduct business. So we suggest keeping them small. If, as the creating entity, the city is the appointer of the board, each additional taxing entity typically can appoint 1. Some jurisdictions will negotiate, give us another, and we'll give you our money, and that's not atypical. I've not had that problem here in Cameron County. Typically, the county has been willing to come into a reinvestment zone with 1 member. And vacancies typically are filled by the city, not by the board. So anytime somebody falls off, either because the term expires or they just move on for whatever reason, that replacement comes back to you, unless it's another jurisdiction's assigned member. The duration of the zones is set when the ordinance to create it is set. In the old days, it used to be fixed, but these days you can add time to it if you need to do so. I have found that many municipalities that choose to use this tool will indeed do that, because once you've established partnerships, in this case, say with Cameron County, and you've got 2 streams of revenue coming into the pot, as you fold down your list of projects because they're paid for or the reimbursements are close to being done, it's not unusual to have the city annex additional territory, talk to the county and say, hey, we've been partnering on all of this stuff. Would you come in over here and also help us over here? And so sometimes you'll see them extended and expanded because they are very effective tools. But otherwise, if nothing happens and the project plan list is paid for, you're done. And by operation of law, it terminates. Next slide. The creation steps, there's 2 slides here. Basically, you know, if you're going at it to expand a base and you're not driven by a specific project, you need to determine a target area. We know where it is in this instance because Mr. Garza has specific land that he wants to develop. There's an analysis that has to be run to determine levels of residential versus commercial. In this instance, because it's raw land, that's not an issue. And then, of course, you have to determine whether the reinvestment zone is going to generate enough money to pay for the things that are estimated that need to be paid for. That typically is step 1 for me. When somebody comes to me and says, will you help us do one of these? The first thing I do is say, what does your engineer say it's going to cost you to do this? And if it's $30 million and the zone only generates 22, there's no point. But in this particular instance, and we'll get to the numbers in a minute, the output, assuming participation rates at 50% by both the city and the county, you'll see that the output is more than adequate to cover the reimbursable costs associated with this development. But once that analysis is done, you have to determine the jurisdictional partners and see if it works, and then run through a preliminary plan preparation so that you can share that back with everybody and make sure that what's in that plan makes sense for the creating entity as well as the county. And there's an important point here. Because there is oftentimes, and certainly in this case, a developer who has specific goals that he wants to accomplish and specific things that he wants to get reimbursed for, because your revenue streams would be healthy, it affords the jurisdiction that's creating this an opportunity to say, well, if we're going to go about the process of doing this, maybe we ought to think about expanding the purpose and add a few things to it that will benefit us specifically. For example, when I did the one in Mission, it was driven primarily by Hunt Development. They had 6,000 acres of onion fields and they wanted to develop them. Like this instance, it was all raw. There was no plumbing, nothing. You had a bunch of gas lines that you had to relocate. There was a lot of work to be done. Rough estimate was about $39 million in infrastructure just to do basics. The city said, if we're going to do this, since the Hunts are going to spend all of this money and go vertical and generate all these taxes, we'd like to go ahead and add a bunch of municipal things to this too. So we actually had two budgets, one for Hunt and one for the city. And the Hunt was 39, the city was $36 million. And on the city side, we put in libraries, we put in expansions of sewer plant, we put in fire stations, police stations, park facilities, those kinds of things, because we knew ultimately the reinvestment zone would indeed have the capacity to finance these things, and the city didn't have that kind of money at the time. And sure enough, over the course of the 12 years that I managed that reinvestment zone before I handed it back to the city, we saw a tax-based expansion of just under $400 million. We sold two tranches of bonds, and with those dollars, we built a fire station, an emergency operations center, a couple of police substations, a library upgrade. We started doing the sewer plant expansion all on the city side, while still taking care of the Hunt development. And we had enough money left over from our bonds, basically, to engineer the Anzalduas Highway. And so that reinvestment zone stepped into the shoes of the city to take on the responsibility that the city had obligated itself to with the state of Texas, TxDOT, to connect to that new international bridge. And the reinvestment zone did the city's work for the city using surplus revenues. And so in the case of the creation process, you have to talk to the jurisdictions and see if they'll play. Well, I mentioned the $23 million that would be incurred to render this land developable. I've already visited with Indian Lake. They have, of the 23, they have $3.5 million in infrastructure, but once you add interest, which would be necessary for a debt, it would be about $5.5 to $6 million. They're comfortable sustaining participation that would generate that. We also visited with Cameron County and visited with Commissioner Garza. And Commissioner Garza said that if the cities will participate with the developer and create these zones, that he would also contribute county revenues. And one of the things that's really great about the use of this tool as a city is that for stuff like this, when you're talking about building, roads, circulators, park spaces, things that typically the county would not finance inside the boundaries of a city, through a reinvestment zone with their interlocal agreement, you get to use their money to do those very things inside your city. And he basically said, if everybody is willing to play, I'll come in as well. So we know for a fact that there's a partnership to be had here that would be very beneficial for everybody involved if everybody will commit to use this tool to make this development happen. Next slide, please. In terms of creation, the statute does require public notice be issued by the city or the county creating it. That typically is a published notice in a paper at least 7 days prior to a hearing that has to be held on the creation of the reinvestment zone. Once the hearing is conducted, there has to be an ordinance that makes the statutory findings legitimizing the creation of the zone. There's an appointment of directors. We talked about that earlier. And then a finalizing of the plan. And the way the statute is set up, the statute obligates the board of directors to come up with a preliminary plan. Typically, that plan is developed with the developer, his engineer, and the governing jurisdiction that creates the zone, so that when the board gets it, they basically already have a document to consider. However, in some instances, they can actually hire their own consultants and generate their own plan. That's a bit of a challenge, though, because there isn't any money initially. And so, but the plan has to be generated. It has to be submitted to the TERS board for their approval. But once they approve it, it comes to you guys. It's not final until you bless it. And that's by statute. So it doesn't matter what happens at the zone level. The city's always going to be in the driver's seat in terms of the use of this tool. And then beyond that, there is a step required to approve the interlocal agreements with, in this instance, with the county. There wouldn't be one with Indian Lake because it is a separate town. We would actually have to create a separate, much smaller zone that would cover their area. But effectively, they would dovetail and cover the same kinds of costs across both jurisdictions. Next slide, please. This list basically sets forth from the statute the eligibility criteria for directors to serve on a board. You'll note they have to be qualified voters, 18. I mentioned the 15-member total that is max. And then each jurisdiction does get a board member. Terms are typically staggered. They last 2 years. My experience has been that once a board of directors is approved, typically they serve for a while. But again, they could be reappointed by council since you all are the creating entity. Council typically appoints the chairperson, and then the board appoints the vice and the secretary, etc. There is an annual reporting required to the state comptroller's office. This is something that I helped the comptroller set up about 14 years ago so that there would be a capacity to report to the legislature how these tools are being utilized across Texas. The termination of the zone is possible by the city if the city decides that it wants to assume the obligations of the zone. This doesn't happen often, but there have been financial instances where there is so much surplus revenue being generated by the reinvestment zone that sometimes makes more sense to just grab it, assume the debt, refi it when you do your next bond issue, and you end up with surplus revenue. That would be one example. As I mentioned earlier, if no annexations are done and the zone is doing its work, it terminates by operation of law once implementation has been completed. Next slide, please. Redevelopment authorities. I mentioned that these are debt facility mechanisms. A TERS board by itself doesn't have the power to issue bonds. You can't give it the power to issue bonds. If you create it and you don't do a local government corporation, then any debt that might be considered by this entity would be debt issued by the city. Some cities are okay with that. Working with a colleague of mine in what used to be the public finance section of Vincent and Elkins, about 25 years ago, we came up with a methodology of using local government corporations to issue bonds rather than have the city do it. There is a section of the state transportation code that allows for creation of LGCs, these local government corporations. It was put in the statute back in the 1920s, and it was used primarily for railroad projects. But the reason we asked Vincent and Elkins to help us was that we got snake bit by development that occurred where bonds were sold by the city. And the development didn't occur fast enough, and so we had to dip into the city's general fund for a couple of years to cover debt service. It ultimately all worked out, but we didn't want to have to repeat that mistake, basically. And so we used LGCs and we empowered them by agreement to implement the plan on the city's behalf and to be able to issue bonds. But we put a condition on there that said that they could not do that without city consent. So they were once you get to a point where there's enough revenue to justify a bond, if you put an LGC in place, the LGC would still have to come back and ask for permission. But the advantage to using LGCs versus doing it yourself is that the bonds are, the pledge of debt service comes from the revenue streams that go into the TERS pot. And once those bonds are issued, they are not obligations of the city. They are obligations of the local government corporation. And so you don't have need to dip into your revenue streams to cover those. We have, I guess over the course of the last, since we did the first LGC, I've done close to $1 billion worth of bonds through various local government corporations all over the state of Texas. We've never had a default, but we're very careful about how we do that and making sure that there's adequate coverages and surplus revenues as well as debt service reserve funds. And it's the way to go if you're going to do it. Next slide, please. This is a map of both reinvestment zones. Next slide, please. Expanded version. The zone on the bottom, obviously, is that which we would ask for you to consider creating. If you'll look at the bottom section of that where you have those small parcels of land, starting from the right to the left, that large block, and then the next four heading to the left are owned by Mr. Garza. Everything else along Highway 100 up to 803 is owned by different people. I had suggested to Mark when we visit that if we go through the exercise of creating that it makes sense to go ahead and put those parcels in as well, because you can use this tool to help catalyze some of the commercial development that would occur there, and or to help drive what goes there by virtue of using the tool to make it a little bit sweeter by helping whoever might develop with reimbursable costs. Next slide, please. This plat, I understand, has been approved by the city for the section within Los Fresnos. You'll note that there's a very busy section on the bottom half and then a not so busy section on the top half where Whipple Road is what divides those two sections. The south of Whipple is south of Whipple is what is in Los Fresnos. You have 775 lots that are provided for in this plat is configured, and then another, I want to say 78 in Indian Lake, excluding the commercial tracts. Next slide, please. The engineers have generated, it's almost impossible to see based on the coloration. Mark, did they get hard copies? Yeah. Yes, okay. Well, you should be able to read a little bit more clearly, and I apologize. I probably should have made those fonts white instead of black. But you'll note in the phase one, you've got 276 lots. There's $8.7 million total in infrastructure associated with this phase. Next slide. In phase two, you have 221 lots, 5.2 million and change in infrastructure that would be necessary for development. And then next slide, please. Third phase. You'll note another 5.2, slightly different numbers, and 277 lots total. All combined, it's just a little over $19 million, as I mentioned, of costs associated with this. Next slide, please. This is basically a quick synopsis of the impact on your city. You know, the ask basically would be to create the TERS so that it could refinance the $19.3 million. But I want to emphasize the developer is proposing to put that money into the ground out of his own pocket or out of borrowed revenue. We're not asking the city to come up with any money at all. This would be developer risk. If he produces and the zone generates the cost, then he gets reimbursed. We're not asking you to spend a penny on this. At 50% of your current tax rate, if you were to dedicate that to the TERS over a 30-year period, based on assumed rate of growth in the revenue model, we're estimating $42.9 million would be generated for the TERS. Given that that's 50%, $42.9 million would also come into your general fund over the same time period. The county, using the same 50% figure, would generate $36.1 million at 50% of their current tax rate. They would also get $36 million into their general fund as well. We estimate very conservatively that the tax base would expand by $880 million over that same time period. One question you might ask is why 30 years? It seems like a long time. As I mentioned, these are debt facility mechanisms, and you can't really do anything by way of a borrowing or a bond really for about the first 5 years, because it takes a while for the revenue to ramp up. There's a delay. If we were to create tonight and beginning January, the developer starts to do aggressive development. Let's say they do $20 million of development in 2023. Well, that value doesn't show up on the tax rolls until 2024. It's not certified until September or so of 2024. And the taxes on that 20 aren't collected and come into the pot until 2025. So even though we were to create now, you wouldn't see a penny for almost 3 years. And given that, it'd take another couple of years to get to a point where you could actually justify selling bonds, because you got to get to at least, $700,000 to $800,000, maybe $1 million in revenue annually to justify doing a bond. But the bottom line is that, with city and county at 50%, you're looking at basically a 57 versus 42% split in terms of the burden of the costs that would be borne to reimburse this $19 million. But you're getting county almost to pay for half. And I'm estimating that if bonds were sold in year 5, you'd probably have to add another $15 million to the project cost to cover the interest. Next slide, please. I put these in the PowerPoint so that you could see the detail that was generated by South Texas Infrastructure. There's no need to really focus on that, but it does break it out by jurisdiction and by phase so that you can see the number of lots that are coming out online. Next slide, please. This is a build-out schedule that reflects how many units would come out and estimated values per year that would be added to the tax roll. Next slide, please. This one's impossible to read. I apologize, but it does detail for you the revenue model that sets forth where I got the 42 million and the 35 million for the city and the county, so that you can see and what the Indian Lakes piece would also be, so that you can see what each jurisdiction generates on an annual basis. These are assumed rates. I am guilty consistently, but very intentionally of very conservatively building these models out. I only grow the value at 3% per year after build out is complete, but you know that value is going to be increasing during build out. And so we know that there's a conservative impact that would ultimately increase values. This market is growing like crazy. 3% a year is super conservative based on what's actually going on. So the reality is that while I'm estimating $880 million tax base expansion, I fully expect that this is probably going to be somewhere in the vicinity of about 1.2, 1.3 billion over the same period of time, which means more money. It means it's going to pay back faster. That's it. That's, we're asking for your help. We're asking for you to give serious consideration to creating this reinvestment zone. Mr. Garza is looking at it, and he has a very deep concern over the $23 million that it's going to cost just to put the streets and the plumbing in so that he can start building houses. That's a pretty significant burden. But at the end of the day, the revenue impact that would be favorable to the city would be, I believe, in excess of $60 million over that same 30-year time period. And that's, again, assuming conservative numbers. I'm happy to take any questions. And I thank you so much for your time tonight.
So you talked a lot about the benefits of the tax increment reinvestment zone.
Yes, sir.
And my question is, what is the dark side of the tax incremental reinvestment zones, and what kind of risk does the city take on by doing some of this project with taxpayers that essentially are not benefiting from this, but yet they're still paying into it? Is there any risk there?
Well, I guess let me take that from two perspectives. In terms of risk, from the first perspective, because we're not asking the city to spend any money, to do anything, to make this happen. If you create it and just let it sit there, if the developer fails or the developer puts in the first 5 and then something happens and he can't proceed, it has not cost the city anything, and it won't. In fact, because it's there, you could use it conceivably to bring somebody else in and offer the same benefit to them. So you actually benefit. So from that perspective, there isn't really a dark side. But you bring up a very good point, Mayor, and I'm grateful you did. There is a cost that comes with the provision of municipal services. As you expand the number of homes, we were talking fire a lot earlier today, there would be a burden that you would see there as far as what the city would be obligated to do. The good news is that there is within the statute something that myself and several colleagues worked to put in. I want to say it was during Mayor White's administration, let's call it 14 years ago. He had a very a lot of heartburn over the fact that there was a shift of burden to people that were outside the zone that were paying for municipal services. And the number, because we had created over 20 zones in Houston, the number was going up, from 28 to 35 to 42 to $48 million a year that was being carved out away from the general fund into these various pots to pay for the TERS costs. And he said, I don't like this. I need a solution. And so what we did was we put in the statute the capacity to for a city as a creating entity to enter into what's known as a municipal services agreement, whereby to the extent that there was a surplus dollar that would be generated, and there are, if these things are set up right, generally there's going to be a good stream of revenue that's not pledged to debt service, especially after you've done bonds, because initially everything you spend is on debt service, but as it continues to grow, your debt service number remains the same, if not comes down a little, and so you end up with more and more money. And what we did basically was create a means by which through these agreements, the city could carve money back out and put it back into the general fund. But that also can be mitigated in different ways, Mayor. And one of the things that I realized as I was building the city's portfolio of zones was that because these things do the kinds of things that cities do on their own, that we could use the capacity to expand the plans to add capital projects that weren't a developer-specific thing and cover those by the reinvestment zone pot and use other jurisdiction monies to do it as well, and pull that off of the city's list so that you could reallocate taxes that would have gone to, say, a police substation and spend them instead on a swimming pool or on municipal services or whatever might be the need du jour. Make sense?
It makes sense. I'm just, obviously I as my, my knowledge in investments and more risk and more return,
Yes, sir.
all I'm hearing is the good side of things, but there's got to be another side, a flip side to it. And I guess I'm just a little too naive, or I don't really know too much about this. Give me maybe some more time to come up with some more questions, but I just think about our taxpayers and how it will
Certainly.
affect them.
Certainly.
And to be able to help with this project.
From one of the things that I have seen is that zones that are not set up with appropriate economic engines. In other words, you can create a zone all day long, but if you don't have a developer to expand the tax base, or the city sees a redevelopment opportunity and they say, let's put a TERS over there, but there isn't a capital improvement that's going to happen that's going to generate revenue, then I'm not going to use the word stagnate, but it doesn't produce. And so if there's a contemplated plan long-term, say a 5-year plan for revenue streams, and you're adding an anticipated stream of revenue from that area and it doesn't come, then you'll have a shortfall. But again, as I mentioned earlier, and it bears emphasizing, there really isn't a financial risk to the city. because the zones, if they don't produce, can be terminated. And alternatively, if the zone is spending up plenty of capital, you can still terminate if you assume the obligations and just reallocate the funds so that you take advantage of the surplus revenues.
I understand that. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hello, sir. Thank you very much for coming today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for your time.
I have a question on the 3% increase on tax revenue base. If we get more than a 3%, like you said, that's a very conservative value, do we have the option to pay back before without penalties?
I'm sorry, what now?
Do we have an option to pay back whatever is our part? Can we pay that faster?
The city's always in the driver's seat in terms of how you would choose to use this tool. I use the 50-50 as a starting point, partly because I know the county really prefers to do no more than that. And so I figured it just made sense for the other jurisdictions as well. But if the city were to elect to put in more money, it certainly could. But the 3% that I mentioned really was an assumed annual growth in the value above and beyond what was built once it's there. If that value grows faster, and it typically does, the city could even conceivably, if you hadn't sold bonds yet, could modify your rate down so that you end up with more revenue instead of sending it to the TERS, as long as you've got enough to cover the TERS obligation. So yes, I mean, you have a lot of flexibility in how the tool could be used.
And when it comes with Indian Lake, you said there has to be its own little entity that would need to be created for those 70 lots that are going to be built.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have to deal with or find an agreement with zoning or anything like that with
No, sir.
Indian Lake.
No, sir, you do not. Whatever rules currently apply to your development standards would continue to be applicable inside the boundaries of a zone. And it's up to council whether you would choose to modify those or waive them or take a different kind of action related to the development. But nothing changes in terms of how development occurs. The approval process for the plans, the permits that are required, the impact fees that have to be paid, all of that stuff continues to play out just as it would normally.
After working with some of the areas here in the valley that you mentioned, and you mentioned the Madeira development going down the road, I figure you have a good idea of Los Fresnos and the future impact that this town can have with its growth. What does your expertise, what can you tell me about the city of Los Fresnos in the future through your eyes?
I'll base the comment on what I see happening not only in Brownsville, but in zone work that I continue to do in Mission and in Benitez, and consulting work that I've done on the island, particularly in light of what's happening with the spaceport complex. There is an incredible shortfall of lots and opportunities to do home building. You're seeing some of the developers who have used municipal utility districts in Brownsville going back and knocking on the door, seeing if they can repeat that action. The reason why Madeira did the TERS was because it worked very effectively for them in zone number 1 to help mitigate their development costs. That particular zone's got just under 200 million in infrastructure costs. But getting back specifically to your question about what does it mean for us and what do I see happening, you're going to see because it's already starting to unfold, a very aggressive development that's going to become very competitive. And you either are competing well with that and using the tools available, or you're not. we are, in the parcel of land that we're talking about, literally just a little over 1.25 miles away from a reinvestment zone that, because of its reimbursables, is going to be able to mitigate costs of their development, the offerings of their lots. And I'm not suggesting that they're going to be cheap, but they're cheaper than they would be otherwise because of the costs. And what that's going to do is it's going to drive a lot of the market in that area. And one of the reasons why other people are knocking on the doors in Harlingen, in Weslaco, in McAllen about expanding the use of these tools is because without them, those that are using them are going to be advantaged. And what I would suggest to you is that even without it, you're going to see market growth here. But this gives you a means by which to more aggressively compete with the other jurisdictions that are also using this tool and attract the capital investment here rather than have it go somewhere else. People that do development for a living, if they can increase their rate of return by 15 to 18% by virtue of the reimbursements, they're going to go for those. And in the case of the city, Los Fresnos, I think really is a crossroads because your proximity to Brownsville, as well as to the island where they've already got a couple of these zones going. Harlingen has 3. Weslaco is looking at their first. It's going to, if you don't do it, I'm not going to suggest that you're not going to see development. I just don't think you're going to see it as aggressively, and you won't see your tax base expand as much. And the thing about these is that they do generate collateral development that doesn't necessarily require incentive, because once you have a population base, you'll start to bring in service commercial entities, the supermarkets, the service industry, strip centers that generate more sales tax and that kind of thing. And so I believe that you'll see growth. You use this tool, you'll see it come a lot faster, a lot more aggressively. That's for sure.
So if we were to approve this, I don't know what the proper procedure is. I don't know if this is phase 1 of you guys approaching us, or is there a vote? Is there a vote that's happening?
It says presentation and discussion only.
Okay, so if we would approve this, how fast are these developers willing to get on that land? Are we looking at 6 months to start, or
How fast is
are developers willing to start working on that plan?
they're waiting for determination of the jurisdictional decisions to figure out the financial viability. They're ready. I mean, they've got a plat. They've got the engineering costs. We know what the other 2 jurisdictions will do if you guys come along. You are the lion's share of this.
We got the main responsibility here since it's predominantly mainly in our area.
Sure.
So we're taking on a lot of this. So I guess there's a lot of information though I still want to find out a little bit more about the risk entailed in this. I mean, the benefit looks good. You've definitely given us a viewpoint of what this could lead to and the potential. And, everybody here wants the city to grow, but at the same time, I'm still kind of curious about some of the negative impacts that something like this could have in some of the surrounding areas. Property values would definitely go up a lot, very similar to what they were proposing down at the end of the highway with the arena and stuff like that. So this definitely gives me I want to ask more questions and I guess get to know the ins and outs of this before we.
Certainly. What we had suggested to Mark when we visited was that we visit with you, and if the city was comfortable, the next step would simply be to publish notice so that we can move toward a hearing. But the other jurisdictions basically they're green light, but they're in a holding pattern waiting for you guys, and so is the developer, because at the end of the day, the help is necessary to make this work. But the rewards to the city in terms of financial impact and benefit are also greatest to Los Fresnos because of the fact that the bulk of this land and the bulk of the development is in your jurisdiction. And one thing I might just, I guess, close with is that, you know, in light of some of the comments that were made earlier about the volunteer nature of your fire department and how, you know, how the city has, because of, I guess, financial constraints in part, had to deal with that level of municipal service. This tool has a capacity to stimulate and generate significant surplus revenues that could be utilized to help mitigate that. You know, it's one of the things that we always encourage in the creation process, that before we finalize a plan, that we sit down and look at what your wish list of things is so that we can add it to the mix, because to the extent that it's there, you get the county involved, you get their help too. So.
Earlier, you indicated that you had to work out other projects in the valley. You mentioned Mission,
Yes.
the Hunts development,
Yes.
and then where else?
In the city of Penitas, we did a 800-acre residential commercial development driven by the Bell family. I also did one in Edinburgh on behalf of Mr. Bill Burns and his sons for a mixed-use residential development there. I've been in dialogue with the city of Weslaco regarding one that they're contemplating just south of the floodway off of Texas. And there's a couple, Harlingen has 3 that I recall, and there's a couple that I'm aware of that are also on the island. So you've got a number of jurisdictions that have used this tool here.
Did you do any commercial? Any commercial?
On this one?
On this type of a program, did you do any commercial?
Oh, yes, sir. As a matter of fact, the Walmart relocation that happened in the city of Penitas was driven largely by the TERS. When they realized that they could get reimbursed for their sewer line and their water lines, which are, in their case, I believe it was like $80,000. To Walmart, you wouldn't think that would be a big deal, but that they could get it back was all they needed in order to be able to go there. In the city of Mission, there was substantial commercial development and revitalization done downtown. We actually did a facade improvement program there using TERS dollars to help some of the smaller businesses improve Main Street and the look of Main Street. And in Brownsville, in the first reinvestment zone, which is called Santander, the commercial tracks that were put in that zone along Morrison Road are now starting to come out of the ground. Yeah, so yeah, it's very typical to see mixed use out of these.
Mark, would this be the first TERS agreement that we would do with county?
No, sir, we have a current one that was used to fund street repairs and Henderson Road, Resaca Crossing. And it's about, I guess we're about 7 years into it. A little bit different than, you know, this is with a developer, that was with us, just looking at helping to finance upgrades in different areas that we needed. As, like he said, about now we're working to project numbers to see if we have enough to do other projects, and we might, because generally speaking, you use conservative numbers and they come out better than.
Right.
Is this a tool you see useful for yourself in helping managing the city?
They are definitely useful. You know, the concern I have as developer and how that impacts other developers is something that you have to consider.
Mark, have we ever had something like this? I know we've had several areas pop up. Have we ever been approached with any of the development here in Los Fresnos in regards to using this type of approach?
No. When Mr. Bill Hudson owned all of the property here, he was
The lakes?
developing a kind of the same but different. We would have gone into an agreement with them to provide services, but he would, and it never went full force. So the details, I can't remember, it's been so long, but some of the tax base, it would stay out of the city for a while, and the tax base would go to, their tax rate would be the same as ours, but the tax rate would go to pay for the infrastructure cost. And then once that's done, then it would become in the city. I don't know if that makes sense. So yeah, we were a long ways into it, but it never transpired.
Well, it sounds very enticing, but at the same time, I'm just kind of cautiously wanting to know a little bit more ins and outs.
I know we've got to be cautious. We have a lot of things to contemplate with the economy in the future and the development that's happening around us, and I do see it, and we all see it happening. I definitely don't want to be behind the curve when we can get a jump start. I don't know how much time we need, but I'm willing to be able to have a decision ready for next month, considering that'll give me 30 days to really go ask any more questions that I may come up with Mark, with yourself, Mr. Calderon. If you wouldn't mind, any questions that I would have, I'd probably address them through Mark and he.
Sure. No, my phone number is on the last page, and you're more than welcome to call me if you want to go direct, or we can set up call with the city manager. Either way, I'm happy to respond. And it's important that you guys come at it comfortable. One of the things that I am very proud of in my practice, and I learned this doing it at the city, so I understand the city's needs. I understand, why it's got to make sense. And one of the things that I've been able to consistently do for clients, whether they're private or governmental, is structure a plan and structure the use of a zone such that it's win-win, so that you get the developer to make the capital investments, but you also end up in a much better financial position as a result of the use of this tool, because it's important that it work that way. There's no point to being put in a position of giving away too much. You don't have to do that in order to be able to make it work. But Mayor, I think there was a question about other developers, and this comes up frequently. If we give it to this guy, is there going to be a horde of people coming and knocking on the door, saying, since you're giving away tax dollars, why can't we have some too? My frank advice would be willing to consider that. Be willing to figure out how you can use these tools, because as long as you can assure that by virtue of setting it up correctly, that it is indeed a win-win, then what you're doing is you're using tools available to you to really grow your city, but grow it in a way that is more suitable to the demands that you're going to have. I didn't speak to this earlier, but one of the things that I learned from a previous boss had to do with how these tools basically put the city at the table. Zone number 2 in the city of Houston was in Midtown, and we had Randall's, the supermarket, come in and say, we've seen you giving development agreements to, these apartment complexes and these guys that are doing townhomes, and we've got some costs that we're going to incur if we put our store here. So we'd like an agreement to do that, and you give us an agreement, we'll build a $14 million store. And we desperately needed. It was what they call the food desert in that area. We didn't have supermarket services in that part of the city, and it was starting to go like this because of the TERS. So we wanted them. But they wanted to do one of those suburban things where the store's at the back of the lot and it's a big old giant parking lot, and it didn't really lend itself to the walkability that we were trying to establish in that part of town. And so I watched my boss basically put the city at the table and negotiate, the granting of the incentive in return for modifications to their development plan, so that we ended up with underground parking and the store all the way up front with landscaping all the way around. All of that stuff was put in the agreement and obligated to be delivered by the store in return for not only what they needed in terms of the plumbing that they wanted to get reimbursed, but we even paid for the landscaping too, as long as they fronted the money. And so to the extent that, you know, that you have a tool like this and you decide, especially if you've got a county as a partner, you want to use this to do other things, and that's kind of why I suggested putting in those lots on Highway 100. You can use this to exact from people that would be doing a deal their way to maybe meet you halfway and do it your way too, so you ultimately get something that's more appealing, something that's better for the city. So I've taken a lot of your time, so I thank you so much. I really do thank you for your listening, and I do hope that you'll give it serious consideration. We need you. We really do.
We found it very interesting, so. It's kind of like when you're buying that car, you're like, hold on, let me go talk to my wife. I'll be right back, you know?
Well, I was very, very serious. If any questions come up, do not hesitate to call me. And if you need me to come back and do another session, I'm happy to do that too.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move on due to the sake of time. Moving on to action item number 5. Well, yeah, 3 on here, but 5 in as far as the order we were going. Again, we're a little off, so action item 3, or to me 5, reads discuss, consider, and select administration project delivery service providers to complete application and project implementation for the CDBG MIT RCP funding administered by the Texas General Land Office. Mark?
Mr. Mayor and members of the council, what we're working to do is apply for a grant for an update of our comprehensive plan. Always need to do that. Y'all will be very much involved in that if we get the grant. And it's basically a roadmap of what do we need to be working on in the next 10 years. The key ingredient in there is mitigation, and mitigation has to do with what can you do to and put in the plan to resolve flooding, to resolve traffic problems, to resolve any issues that come up. You put in that plan so that you can mitigate those things from happening. So that's kind of the focus is comprehensive plan, but with a strong focus on mitigation. GrantWorks is our grant company that does a lot of stuff for us. They don't do all of them, but they do a lot, and they presented it. They're also the firm that did them the last time, so they have something good to work for if we are able to secure the grant. So that's what we're asking for.
That's not a bad idea. I mean, it's money that's out there that we can utilize for best interests of the city. I mean, why not? Why not? It'd be crazy not to take advantage of this, especially since we haven't done one since 2014. So it's definitely good to go back and see what we can do to mitigate, like you said. Any questions from the board? Pretty slam dunk. If not, if there's a motion to be, and it says discuss, consider, and select. So we've discussed it.
Yeah, you're selecting, you're approving the resolution, and GrantWorks is part of that resolution.
Oh, okay, okay, so with that said, is there a motion to be made?
I'll make a motion to complete the application and projects improvement for the CDBG MIT RCP funding administered by the Texas General Law Office.
Motion has been made,
I'll second.
and motion has been seconded. With that said, all those in favor signify by saying aye and raising your hand. Aye. And all those who oppose do the same. Motion carries. Consideration and action on the selection of mayor pro tem for a 1-year term. I know we've had Gabby over the last year. Any comments or questions in regards to this? I know at the time we had Mr. Lopez, and it was hard for him to come in and participate whenever something could happen. And I knew Gabby's always involved in the community, so I kind of figured, I know that if for some reason I couldn't make it to something, I know that Gabby would be able to represent at the time. And I don't think there's ever been a time where Gabby has not participated. But with that said, I know that there's others folks on here that would like an opportunity. And, you know, I know that Luisa is always participating in things as well. I'm not too sure with the rest of the council, but I know that these two right here are always engaged. And you know, I'm open to any thoughts that any of the council has in regards to a mayor pro tem. This would be somebody that would step in and be available in the event that, you know, I couldn't make it to an event or to be on behalf of, if I couldn't be here. So if you guys think that you're.
You know, I would like to nominate Luis Gonzalez for Mayor Pro Tem. Of course, if he accepts, I mean.
I second that motion.
I'm sorry?
I second that motion.
Okay, motion has been made and seconded for Luis Gonzalez to run the next mayor pro tem. With that said, all those in favor signify. Luis, I guess you're in this by raising your hand or saying aye. Aye.
I don't know if I'm allowed to vote for myself, right? Yeah. I'll definitely accept, guys. Thank you very much. I do
And if
appreciate
anybody
it.
who, I guess all of us agree to that. Anybody who disagrees, you can also make your motion now. What I'm going to say with that is that Gabby's done a great job. I know that she's, I knew from the time she took the position the first time that she would be involved. And I know that Luis is going to do the same thing. So it gives us each an opportunity to be able to participate and be a part of different functions. So it's a win-win for everybody. And I look forward to, you know, Gabby, great job. Luis, I look forward to you stepping up when the time is needed. So again, thank you. So let's move on to action item number 7. Discussion and review of applications received for upcoming vacancies and current members in the following board and positions: Community Development Corporation, place 3, Leonel Casanova, place 4, Marco Huerta, and place 7, Daniel Alvarez. At this time, Mark, do we have any consensus from any of these members? I know Marcos Huerta really well, and he did mention to me that he loves what he does, and given the opportunity, you know, he'd be happy to jump in there. I know he's a law enforcement officer down at the university, and he used to be a Rotary member. He's a really nice man. I'm not really too familiar with Mr. Alvarez. I think I met him once. And Leonel Casanova, I'm not too familiar with who he is, but any thoughts or any comments or questions? I would say Marcos Huerta. I would motion for Marcos Huerta to be in that, continue to be in that position.
Does anybody or has any other people showed interest? Anything else come in? Does anybody else have any person,
No,
individuals that they may consider or want to consider?
I know that these guys.
Is there a motion to make or no?
I made a motion for Marcos Huerta.
I motion to keep Marco Huerta.
Okay, so motion has been made for Mr. Marcos Huerta and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye or raising your hand. Aye. All those who oppose do the same. So we got 2 other candidates. You know, if these folks are willing and able, and we don't have a lot of people, I don't see why we can't continue to. Yeah, so I guess I'll motion to continue with the other 2 members, being that, you know, they're already doing it and they have no problem coming and doing this thing. So, is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, motion has been made and seconded for the other 2 members to remain in their place. With that said, all those signify by agreeing by raising your hand and saying aye. Aye. And all those who oppose do the same?
If I understand what the motion is.
The motion was to continue with who's already on there?
The 3 of them?
Yeah, the 3, because we have no other candidates, so, yeah. So you're you with it?
Yeah, I'm with, yes, I make a
Okay,
motion.
so all of us are in favor that these gentlemen continue with their roles. And we'll go ahead and move on to the next part of the meeting, which is the acknowledgement of the city manager's reports. There's a lot of different things going on. Mark, I don't know if you want to give an update on any specific one?
No specific, except, you know, there's a lot of reading there. If you'll go through that, I answer most of the questions. 100, depending on the rain, maybe coming tomorrow, pray for no rain. They want to pave and stripe in the next week to 2 weeks to have from 1847 to the west open with traffic before Christmas. So that would be great if that could happen. If it rains a lot tomorrow when that front comes in, all bets are off because you don't know how long it'll take to dry. But
Dry up.
they did let me know that, and then they'll focus on this end. They might have to close off one lane of it at a time where they have to still do some sidewalk work, but that's better than the whole thing being shut down.
Mark, when we got the rain right in front of State Farm, it was becoming like a slush fest there. Cars were getting stuck, creating a hazard on there. Are they gonna be able to, if it does rain a lot, are they gonna be able to block out some of those roads that can be a hazard with all the mud and stuff? Or we?
Yes.
Okay.
And we sent them pictures, and plus they fixed that road, so it's solid now.
Solid, okay.
Yeah, Mark, I think one of the deals with that was that they still had that hay clogging up the drains. You only know it was raining.
Correct.
So if they expect rain, take it out so the water can go in and down the drains. I think that's what's happening.
Yeah, they're not supposed to, but we moved it anyway.
Is there any work gonna be done on that railroad or anything like that, where it will take more time?
That's at the end. Railroad kind of runs everything, and so they have to finish everything else, and then they come and do the piece from about the post office to Julia's. They'll do that at the last. But they say that'll be very quick because it's a short distance, and they'll have all of the railroad people involved, and so it'll move quick, they say.
Progress on drainage on Highway 100, on sewer? Is that what's going down on those?
Yes, sewer.
Mark, with the drought contingency plan, I know at one time we were under those water restrictions. I haven't seen a formal notification that we're not already. Are we still in that, or what's the status with that?
No, we sent out to go back to level 1, which is voluntary conservation.
Yeah, I got them letter in the mail.
Okay. Any questions about the city manager's reports? If not, if there's a motion to be made. I know Mark put very detailed notes in there of every single project. If anybody has any questions, if not, motion at this time would be appropriate.
I'll make a motion to accept the city manager's report for December 13th.
I'll second.
Okay, motion has been made and seconded to acknowledge the city manager's reports. With that said, I'll wait till the councilman comes right back so we can take a motion on this. So we just made a motion and seconded to acknowledge the city manager's reports, and we're about to take a vote. So we did have a first and a second. So with that said, all those in favor signify by saying aye, raising your hand.
Aye.
Aye. And all those who oppose do the same. So the next report, we have the acknowledgement of the department head reports. I know there's several reports in there for everybody to review. Does anybody have any questions, or Mark, that you want to specifically point something out? Okay, and if not, if there's a motion to be made, now's the time.
I'll go ahead and make a motion to acknowledge the department head reports.
And I'll second that. The motion has been made and seconded of the acknowledgement of department head reports. All those in favor signify by saying aye or raising your hand. Aye. And all those who oppose do the same. 8:50, motion, meeting is adjourned.